I'm Susan. Welcome to Tea and Games in Space. As promised, I'm going to talk about Moonrakers because we have played through the first of the new expansions. But first, tiny bit of housekeeping. What we played this past weekend, because the Moonrakers game, despite the fact that we are casual weekend board gamers, was not a weekend game. We played that last night, Monday night, at our friendly local game store. Over the weekend, because we've been doing this thing where we're mostly playing new stuff, either new stuff that we've gotten or new stuff off our unplayed game shelf, and because we had this big, massive game coming up on Monday night, this past weekend, we just kept it very, very light and simple. We played Morels. We did not get into the 4A expansion, though. We still haven't played that. But we played some games of Morels. We played Dice Miner, which you just can't get much more light than that. We also played Chili Mafia. And we were trying to figure out why we enjoy that game so much, and I still can't quite put my finger on it, but it may be the cute chili pepper artwork. And we also played Quiddler, which, I mean, I don't know, you can't see the Scrabble board here behind me. It's over behind my head. And I have got this set up so that you can see the table. I'm having to lean into the camera, because I want to make sure that you can see stuff that I want to show you. So it's like the camera is like weirdly different every time I do these things, depending upon what I do. We did not play Sprawlopolis again. And we did not play Micro Macro Crime City again. We've kind of cooled on that. We still haven't gotten to the end of it. And it and Sprawlopolis, we kind of just ran out of time, because another thing we did this weekend was we kind of reviewed Moonrakers, because it had been months and months and months, like several months, like last year since the last time we played it. And we needed to review it, and we needed to review the expansion ahead of meeting up with some local gamers to play it at our friendly local game store last night. So we didn't do Sprawlopolis or Crime City. We worked out in the garden this past weekend because it was just such a lovely day and everything. So between Moonrakers and gardening, it was just all very small, light, happy games. We met up with some local gamers, and this is the Titan box, if you don't know, of Moonrakers from IV Studios. The Kickstarter just delivered last week, and it was mentioned on my previous video, which is why it feels like I'm just dropping into the middle of things here, because I kind of am. I didn't know what to do. We normally just play Moonrakers, just the two of us. And I have to say, and I want to go on record of saying this game plays so badly at two. And they make rules to compensate for it, to make it a good two-player game. But all that really does is actually playing it two-player just by the regular 3, 4, 5 player rules, that actually for us worked better than playing it by their two-player rules, which that game was horrible. But I mean, it plays really badly at two. I mean, I cannot emphasize this enough. If you've got 2 players, that is an excellent way to learn the game mechanics and the flow of the game. It's a great way to learn the game, and you can play it. But it is like, I don't know, weirdly difficult and aggravating to do it that way, and it does not really replicate the full game experience that you would get with more than 2. So really, this is I'm sure, I haven't even looked at the solo mode, but apparently there is a solo mode for Moonrakers, but I never even got into that on the base game. But 3 to 5 that's what you should be doing with this game. But we went over it this weekend, the 2 of us, my husband Robert and I, and because we're our primary game group, though I do want to play this with the extended family, we just actually have not had with the base game of Moonrakers. Since we got it, there's just been other stuff, and we just haven't had one of those big family game days. So they haven't tried this yet, but I do want to play it with them. But basically, we don't have a game group other than just every once in a while a big game day with extended family. So I put out a call on Discord for local gamers saying, you know, I got the Titan box. I want to play the Overload expansion with it because I've got all 3 expansions. Already had the base game, and I got, in the Titan box, I got all 3 expansions, and I got some blingy upgrades because I really like this game, despite the fact that it plays horribly at 2. Playing this game at 2, you just realize how amazing it would be with more people. And it really was. So I put out a call on Discord for local gamers, the Discord for local gamers, and couple of random guys said, yeah, they'd play Discord with me. We set up a date and time last night, Monday night, at our friendly local game store. I was very nervous about this. It's like, yes, I'm meeting strange people on the internet. But not actually because of that, because I mean, it's not like I'm going to meet them in a dark alley or something. My husband is with me. We're at the friendly local game store. We're surrounded by a whole bunch of other gamers. It's cool. What made me nervous is that these guys were probably really dedicated, heavy board gamers. And Robert and I, we're just in it for the fun. And I mean, this is a massive investment of a game, but this game to me just feels like it could become a lifestyle game for me because I just love the gameplay so much. And so that's why I did so much in getting this Kickstarter. But I mean, I'm basically a $30 to $40 a pop game girl. You know, I mean, I don't usually go in for big and expensive. But I did this, and we met up with the 2 gamers last night, and it was okay. They seemed to be okay with the fact that we were not as hardcore gamers as they are, and that we didn't generally play as heavy games as they did, and they were friendly. One of the guys had played the game before, so was familiar with it. One of them, however, though, hadn't played it before, but he had backed the Kickstarter and his hadn't been delivered yet. But I had given them links for the Overload expansion and the base game just to kind of like refresh and learn the new material ahead of time. And boy, Adrian is the one who had not played the game before, and he watched the videos. He was up to speed. He hit the ground running and he won the game. Spoiler alert. So that was actually kind of cool that the guy who hadn't played the game before was the guy who won. We did that. I did not take the comic book with me to the store or the stickers. Take this out because I'm fixing to unpack this sucker here. They gave us a diagram on how to put the stickers into the organization thing here. And I want to look at that a little more closely because I am slightly unsure about their organization method, because I had problems during the game in terms of managing the nifty little box they have for the action cards, in which you pull out the cards during the game. So let's dive into it here. And I'll tell you about the game as we go. It was wild. Okay, Overload expansion, Nomad expansion, Binding Ties expansion, books, base game, books, armory, and dispatch terminals here. These are base game boards. This expansion does not add any new boards. It adds new cards and it adds new tokens. Some of the other expansions, Nomad and Binding Ties, do add other stuff. Okay, here's our reputation terminals here, and let me see if I can move all this over here. I've pulled out some specific cards to show you, to give you some idea of just what they did to the cards and why I was so excited about cards, because this is a deck builder. So of course, an expansion that gives you supercharged cards, I'm going like, oh yes, I am so there. This is the top row of the expansion, besides having an indented area for you to put some of the boards. These are little reputation tokens, which I upgraded, which are for one of the other upgrades. These, however, these are the Iosphere tokens, which are used with the Overload expansion. And I upgraded to the blingy kind because they were just so pretty. And because I love this game so much. Look at how shiny they are. Very shiny. The regular Iosphere tokens are kind of quasi-translucent whitish color. The base game comes with metal coins, if you did not know that. So the metal coins are not an upgrade. That's base game, which is really nice. I did upgrade from plastic to metal ships. I play green. And it plays up to 5. These are the hazard dice, which go from blank to 1 to 2. And you can roll up to 4 hazards, which means that it is theoretically possible that you could take 8 hits on a single contract, though there are ways to mitigate that, and ideally you would not be doing that unless you just kind of wanted to do something wild and crazy. And I did kind of do some wild and crazy things during this game, but not that. I tend to be really cautious about those hazard dice because they will eat your lunch. There's no penalty for failing on a contract in Moonrakers. You can like negotiate a contract with somebody else or do it solo. And if you can't make the requirements when you're laying out those cards, that's fine. There's no penalty to it except for those hazard dice. You roll the hazard dice before you start doing the other, start trying to fulfill the contract. So at the end of the contract, if you have not played enough shields to cover all those hazard symbols on there, then you lose prestige points, which are victory points. And you have to get 10 to win. And you think 10 points is not a lot. Well, heck, in this game, 10 points is a lot. We played this game, and it could be because we were getting up to speed with Overload, the strategy and all, brief teach ahead of time, but this game took 4 players 4 hours at our friendly local game store. We closed the place down. Let me see here. Yeah, BGG says 1 to 5 players is 1 to 2 hours. And for the Overload expansion, they say an hour to an hour and a half. I don't know if that means that it knocks a half an hour off the max time or if it means it adds that much. I suspect it means that it knocks it off because I do feel like that the Overload cards make things much easier. And it's quite possible that we will play this game faster if we sat down and played it again. But we didn't linger real long over negotiations, and sometimes after one person had finished their contract stuff and they're into their buying phase, they're like looking at cards and saying, oh, do I want to get that? And what does that do again? And let me see, and how much money do I have? And they're doing that. Other players are going on and starting to negotiate a new contract, which means that that player is not really like in on the negotiations, but that's kind of okay a lot of the times. And this is the cards for all of the things. Here is where the neoprene mat goes, and I've just got like extra stuff in here, extra sleeves, extra baggies. The hollow deck that was part of the Kickstarter, which I have not sleeved and therefore have not even cracked the plastic on, and these extra boards here, which are next to that. These are objectives and ship parts here. The little narrower cards, they are actually square. And then the regular size cards here, this is contracts and crew. These are objective 6, and these are divided by base game and expansions. And this row here, this is the action deck, which pops out. Because during the game, because it's a deck builder, you're going to be pulling cards and adding to your stack. I think that's all I actually want to get out of here at the moment. Let me see if I can set this back up right. And now I'll show you what we've got. I had some problems. With the organization of this during the game because the way they have this organized, you can see here that the slats for the games, basically you have the base game kind of toward one end, and then the expansion cards along here, because there are fewer of those than the chunk of cards that you get with the base game. The problem with this is that I kind of want to organize it so that all of the reactor cards are together, you know, like base reactor, reactor plus, reactor X, and then all of the thrusters are together, base thrusters, thruster X. I kind of want to do it that way, but that is not an option with this. And I found that I kept getting lost in the cards and figuring out where they were, and I kept trying to rearrange them during the game, and that was just not working. So I need to adapt. But let's show you some of the overload cards. The first thing to get excited about are the action cards, which are supercharged. The reactor X card, instead of giving you the 2 actions of the reactor card, it gives you 3 actions. Very nice. The reactor plus gives you 2 actions, plus you draw a card from your draw deck. So it's kind of like a reactor card and half of a thruster card. But these are very, very nice. The damage cards, all the damage cards are 2 damage plus 1 action. In the base game, you have damage cards that are 1 damage, 2 damage, or 3 damage. These are all 2, but you get an action with them as well. You only have damage plus, there's no damage X. Shields, the damage X blocks 2 hazards. And the base game, it only blocks 1. Shield, the shield plus blocks 1 hazard and gives you 1 action. See a pattern here, don't you? And then the thrusters, the thruster X gives you 3 cards instead of the base game thruster, which gives you 2. And the thruster plus gives you 2 cards plus 1 action. You have these special cards in addition to the base game cards. Now, you don't get these cards at the beginning of the game. The setup still has you starting with the same base hand that you have in the base game. You start with the basic cards, but you can get these cards because if you get, like, here's a ship part here. Here's a couple of ships. This ship gives you a reactor X card as well as a miss up here in the top. And this ship part will give you a reactor plus. So when you buy ship parts, you have the opportunity, depending upon the ship part, to possibly get some of the nicer, more supercharged cards. You can also buy these puppies. The thruster plus and reactor plus cards cost 5. You can see that down here at the bottom. But all of the X cards cost 4, and the plus card for shields and damage also cost 4. So you can buy them during your buy phase. Also, if you do a contract in which a card is part of your reward, you can get one of these. Also, there are ship parts and things on here. I don't think it's crew. I think it's a ship part where once per turn or contract or something, you can swap a regular card for like one of the advanced ability versions of that card, which is also really nice. One of the guys, I think it was Jay, had that card. And so that gives you some idea of the kind of cards that you have. And we looked at ship parts very briefly here. The ship parts do a thing. Not all of the ship parts, but some of the new ship parts, you may notice, have this thing here in their requirements about iospheres. That's what that little symbol there is. Those are the blingy tokens, which are white in the regular non-upgraded version. This one, for instance, after a contract, you can add an iosphere to this card that's part of your ship for every unblocked hazard, or remove an iosphere that's already on this part to re-roll a hazard dice that's targeting you, not one of your allies' hazard dice. This one, you can discard a reactor card from your hand to put an iosphere on the card, and you can remove 3 Iospheres to add a Reactor Plus to your deck. This one you can discard 2 cards from your hand to add an Iosphere to the card. And you can remove 2 to block a hazard. So that's kind of how Iospheres work. Crew, they do kind of the same thing. Not all the crew have Iosphere abilities. Some of them just have regular, interesting, and cool abilities. But like this one, when you play this is actually kind of cool. The way it works for crew. When you play this card on a contract, you will immediately add 3 Iospheres to this card. And now, at the end of a contract, the cards used in a contract and the cards in your hand are discarded. But if you've got Iospheres on a crew card, they stay. And once per contract, you can remove an Iosphere, in this case to block a hazard. In this place to add an action. For this one, you get to deal some damage cards, you know. And this one, you get to draw a card. Oh, yeah. Oh, and this is the one that I was telling you about upgrading. This is a personnel that will allow you to upgrade your cards. Trash a default loadout card from your hand and replace it with any other version of that card. Very nice indeed. But the thing with the crew here is they don't go into discard if they've got Iospheres on them. They sit right down there on the table with those spheres on them, which means that they can be used in future contracts. Normally, when you do a contract, it goes into your discard pile. You draw from your draw pile, and that's what you've got to work with for, you know, the next round of contracts or whatever, until you've gone through that draw pile, and then you shuffle, discard, and then draw from that. But it will stay out there with the Iospheres on it as long as it has Iospheres on it. Now, mind you, you cannot use it as crew on the next contract. If you played it as crew, and I mean, if it's got Iospheres on it, then it's no longer crew. It's out there for that special Iosphere special ability. So that means it's an action, or it's a shield, or it's whatever it is. But I think the Iospheres for crew are very neat. I wanted to get into the whole Iosphere game, but I just never could get the right ship part or crew. But the other players did. And let's talk about contracts. They add 2 new kinds of contracts. They add a head-to-head contract, which is not actually head-to-head. So if you're going like, oh my gosh, it's got head-to-head, and it's not combat. Not really, but this is more like a free-for-all than a head-to-head, because head-to-head kind of implies one-on-one, but that's not this at all. Normally in a contract, one person says, I want to do this. Do you think that you could help me on this contract? Assuming they don't do the contract solo. And somebody will say, yeah, I think I could contribute something to that. But, and then you negotiate the rewards. Because regular contracts have rewards such as prestige points, coins, sometimes a card. You also negotiate who rolls the hazard and has to deal with the hazard dice or splitting the hazard dice. Everything is up for negotiation in a regular contract. In a head-to-head, there's no hazard dice here, but each one has a color for a type of card you have to play, and 2 colors specifically. And whoever can play the most of each of these colors, then they get the 1 prestige point, or however many prestige points there are on the head-to-head combat. And for coins, they actually have, I don't know if you can see here, a 1st and 2nd place. So if only 2 people go in on a head-to-head, then they're going to get a coin out of it, even if they don't get the point. Or actually 3 coins. So that's pretty good. The mission leader doesn't invite people to participate in this. If the mission leader chooses to do this type of contract, anybody that wants to can go in on it. And this also means that the person who chooses to do this contract on their turn, they may not actually be the one to win the contract. They may not get anything off of it. So you only want to choose this if you think you've got like a crap ton of cards that are whatever color it calls for. So those things can be kind of interesting. But the real fun comes with flex. The other new kind of contract is there is a new requirement. See the little shiny star there? Yes, the little shiny star. That is called flex. And that is a new type of requirement. There are no flex cards. There are no new flex cards. What that means is that you can use any card in your hand to fulfill that numerical requirement for that card. So, I mean, that's very cool. The missed cards that were always just an albatross around your neck that you were stuck with and always looking for that opportunity to ditch, you could play them on flex. Now, you can't double dip. If you have to have enough actions to play these cards. I mean, if you have like a flex card that requires you to play 6 thrusters and a bunch of others. I mean, you know, if you've got 6 thrusters or whatever, I mean, you can't just like drop them down. You have to have reactors to play actions, whether or not the card calls for reactors or not. But if it's got a requirement for a specific type of card in addition to the flex, you have to make that requirement separate from the flex, which means that you need to play for this one a total of 14 cards, which means you're going to be drawing at some point in this, and you better have cards in your hand that will allow you to draw, like thruster cards. And that gets into the interesting fun I had during the game. There's this card, the flex requirements on cards. I noticed that when I was going through the cards, that they look kind of high. And they actually run from 6 to 16. So yeah, you got to play a lot of actions and you got to play a lot of thrusters. And I mean, the 16 card actually did come out along with one that required 14. And we were looking at that and joking and going like, wow, it's like, that would only work if you had a hand that was just basically nothing but reactors and thrusters, you know? Reactors so that you would have actions, thrusters so that you could draw more cards into your hand, play more actions, draw more thrusters, play more actions, you know, that kind of a thing. So this was sitting out there. And admittedly, I was in the lead. I was doing really well for myself at this particular point in the game. So I just decided I wanted to have some fun. Because, I mean, I am in this for the fun. I want to win. And it is true, taking this contract may not have been the best, smartest, most hard-headed decision, strategic move. But trying to make this 14 flex was so much fun. It was crazy. And everybody at the table was going like, okay. And they were counting the cards out for me when I was putting them down because I had a hand that was just reactors and thrusters. And I looked at that hand and I remembered what we said earlier about the flex cards, you know, the ones with the really high numbers are going like, wow, that would be great if you just had reactors and thrusters. And so I'm looking at my hand, it's all reactors and thrusters, including like those reactor plus cards. So I'm going like, yeah, why not? Let's see if I can do this. And I came so close. I got to 12. And the guys were like counting out the cards for me. They go, okay, that's 2 actions. Okay, now draw 2 more cards. Okay, it's like, I mean, we were opponents, but I kind of think that some part of them were kind of rooting for me because it was just such a really tough, crazy thing to do. But, I mean, it was fun. It was so much fun. And there was one other contract that I did that I looked at that contract and I said, I don't think I could do this, but I want to try it. And, I mean, I was pretty far up on the board then, but other people were up on the board then as well. So, you know, I felt like I could probably handle the hazard on it, but I wasn't sure if I could handle I thought I could handle the hazard dice. I wasn't sure if I could handle the requirements because the cards in my hand did not give me many actions. I think I had 2 advanced cards that gave me 1 action each and no regular reactors actually in my hand. And yet I said, I kind of think I want to try this, you know, because I needed the prestige points just to kind of make sure that I wasn't totally overtaken there. So I'm just like putting it. So I went for it. And I drew into exactly what I needed. Like each card I drew was like, ooh. And then I play another card and go like, okay, now draw another one. I went, ooh, yes. So I mean, it was huge amounts of fun. Sometimes you've just got to go for it and you've got to take risk. And mostly I played very cautious games, but that was a lot of fun. And there were some other contracts that the guys did where we're like, okay, that's 2 reactors, 1 thruster. Shields, I'm going like, and you have not covered your shields yet. Do you have any shields? You know, it's like, even though we're all competing, we're watching people trying to make these contracts, you know, and everything. And there's a part of us that's kind of rooting for them. It's like going like, okay, now have you covered that? And it's like, okay, you've got 1 action left, you know, and it's like, okay, yes. And we're going like, do you have another reactor? And they're going, okay, another reactor. And it's hard not to root for somebody to pull something off, you know? I mean, yes, we're competing and we want to win and we want those points, but even if we're not allied with somebody, it's like seeing somebody do something like this, you're kind of going like, ooh, wow, can he make it? Can he make it? Yes! You know, and it's fun. It's really fun. So, I mean, yeah, it's really competitive. I took an early lead and so did Adrian. And that made Robert and Jay natural allies because they were lagging behind. So they could ally together on negotiations and basically bootstrap each other up the board closer to Adrian and I. So after a little while, we actually got a fairly tight group. And for a long time, there was a really tight clump of us near the top of the board. And just, you know, one person would move up and then they'd move down and then they'd move up one and then another person would move up one and then they'd move back because of hazard die, you know, and it was just really, really tight. When the game ended, we were all, Adrian got 10. I was at 9 when he crossed the finish line, so to speak. Jay was at 8 and Robert was at 7, which means with that tight of a grouping, 7, 8, 9, 10, that last round there, pretty much anybody, if they got the right contract that had the right number of points on it and they could solo it, could have won. It was close. It felt very close, certainly. Now, I shot myself in the foot. I leaped off to like an early lead and was doing really, really well, making steady progress up that board. But I overbalanced my hand and I ended up with too many action cards and not enough cards to play as actions. You know, it's like, and I actually ended up getting a ship part that said, you get a coin if at the end of a contract you have no shields in your hand or something like that. And I got coins off of that. Oh yeah, I did, because I ended up not having enough shields. But I did have some crew that could sometimes play shields for me. And let me see if I'm covering everything here, but But yeah, I was stuck at 9 or 8 or 9 for a long time, particularly near the end of the game. And that allowed everybody to catch up with Adrian. And I allowed Adrian and I to just kind of jockey for position. And he just got that last thing and it was great. But I really shot myself in the foot. It's a deck builder and I overbalanced on the action things. Because you get stuck sometimes with not enough actions. It's like you got everything you need, but you can't play those cards because you don't have an action card, a card that will give you the action to lay them down. And you're going like, ah. So I kind of overbalanced there. And I ended up with not enough hazards and not enough shields. I could compensate for the shields with some of my crew cards that can act as shields. But the lack of thrusters, which gives you the ability to draw more cards into your hand, which then may be the cards that you need, that hurt. That really hurt. It's like I really rushed up the board very early. And I made slow and steady pace, but I just reached a certain spot where the cards that I had put together between the ship parts, and I didn't get ship parts that I was really comfortable using. Some of them had these things like, it's like you take one of the cards you discarded and put it into the top of your draw deck. But then if you have a card in the top of your draw deck, you can either discard it or keep it. But then I already know what the top of the draw because of the other cards. They didn't work well together. And they're not the kind of ship parts, the actions that I normally get. There were some that I really wanted that other players snapped up that I didn't get. There were crew I wanted that they got. There were contracts I wanted that they got. And that was another thing. Well, a lot of times where I look at this and I'm going like, I can make that contract and somebody else does. It's like, I could solo that, but somebody else does. So it's like, I'm sitting there like planning my next move while everybody else is moving up. And I can never quite get there. It's like the cards in my hand never quite work for what's in there. They worked really, really well at the beginning of the game. And we were pairing up well and negotiating well, not always in good faith. The game started off with a bang. Jay just tanked a contract because he had, one of his first objectives was to bail on a contract. So he got into a contract with Robert and just bailed on it. Just didn't make the thing, but he got the point for the objective. And it's like, that's not a great start to a trusting relationship. And yet, because they were lagging behind, they became natural allies and really helped each other a lot in the game until it became a really tight game. And there are a lot of kind of catch-up mechanisms in this game. And again, it really depends upon how well you build your deck. If you get a really good combination of ship parts that work well for you and that you're comfortable using, the contracts that come up that you can get, it's just, and also the objective cards. Don't forget about those. You fulfill an objective, that's 1 prestige point. Because I was stuck, I ended up staying at base like 3 or 4 times. So it's like at the end of the game, I had a stack of objective cards. The only one I completed was to get like 1 of 4 types of ship parts. And then I immediately swapped one out because it was like not great for my situation. I just got it to get the 1 lousy prestige point off of the objective card. But you can also just very methodically work through your objective cards and you get more every time you stay at base. You can just very methodically work through those and just very quietly build up prestige points without going in on contracts. But you can't win a game doing that. Oh no, that's not enough points. And I mean, some of these contracts have like super points on them. Of course, they also are really tough and you'll have to go in on somebody, which means the points are split. But still, we had one contract, I think it was a contract Adrian and I did, or maybe it was Adrian and Robert, and it was like, it was like 8 points or something, and everybody, the 2 players each got 4 points, and that was like huge. So we had so much fun. It was a 4-hour game and the play was constant with no breaks. And because you are negotiating or attempting to negotiate on other players' contracts, or you are affected by choices other players make, like to do a contract to buy personnel or ship that you may have wanted, or there's also a discard mechanism where somebody can decide to discard one of those cards and pull a new one. And so you're like constantly engaged in what's doing. I will say that reading cards slowed the game down, I think probably as much as just the negotiation phase, because it's not like we spent a long time haggling, but because we hadn't played this game 10 million times and just didn't know all the cards at a glance. Now, contract cards, a basic contract card, you can tell at a glance because they're color-coded. You can tell at a glance whether or not that contract is good for something in your hand or how many hazards you'll have to deal with and what you'll get at it. Symbology up here and down here. You can tell it at a glance. But on the crew, you know, you got to read the fine print if you're thinking about buying a new crew to put into your hand for crew requirements. And the same thing with ship parts. You got to go through the ship parts that are on there and see what you get. And there are 8 contracts out on the table. There are 6 ship parts and there are 3 crew, all on the table at any given time. So in your buy phase, you've got a lot of stuff to consider. It's like, do I buy that? Do I buy that? Do I buy that? And what about that over there? Or I could spend my money on one of the new fancy cards. Yes. So, I mean, yeah, there's a lot of stuff to consider. And I think that's part of the reason that that part, the buy phase, and the fact that you have to read the cards and figure out, okay, yeah, and that, and I've got this here. And you have to kind of do that. That probably added a bit of time to it. I think that if we played this game over and over and over and over again, like the designers probably did, then we might be able to hit that specified gameplay time, because we would have this deep-seated familiarity. We'd be able to tell at a glance that IOMK8 did this, and that the IO cash card was this and had that ability. So yeah, I think that familiarity with cards would speed up the game, but there are a lot of cards. I'm not just talking about the number of cards that I just rattled off that are on the table. I'm talking about the whole decks for these things. And that's another thing that I really liked about the 4-player game. With 4 players, we were cycling through the cards very, very rapidly. The contracts were turning over. The available crew was turning over. The ship parts were turning over. I mean, we did sometimes choose to discard something out of that. Sometimes we discarded it because, like, that was just too hard. Nobody was going to do that. And that slot could be taken up by a contract that might be useful to somebody. Or sometimes one of the guys is looking over going like, look, she only needs 3 points, or he only needs 1 point. And that contract there is really easy. I don't know what they've got in their hand, but she might be able to do that. So I want to discard this contract, because if I don't, she might get that contract and win. And that's another reason why you might want to discard a card. But there was a little bit more card discarding toward the end, as everybody was looking for things that was optimal, that would put them over, give them that little bit extra that they needed, or keep somebody else from getting that little bit extra that they needed. But the cards cycle fast. They really do in a 4-player game. So you get a constant flow and turnover of contracts and personnel and ship parts, and I mean, you can replace ship parts in your ship even after you filled out the 4. And in crew and contracts, it's just really, the gameplay was incredibly smooth. And you're going like, oh my God, how can you talk about that? This is like a 4-hour game. And I'm going like, I didn't realize that it had gone that long until somebody came around saying, we're going to be closing up in 20 minutes, just so you guys know. You might want to start wrapping it up, And so we did finish, right around store closing time. And then we just like all hands on deck, just picking up things and sorting them and putting things away and cramming stuff into the box here. I sorted them out after I got home, because we tried to sort, but then it's like I have to find the exact spot where everything goes. I'm just going, no, we're just going to shove them in there, and I'll sort it all out at home and like rack everything into the big box and let's go. Because I mean, yeah, it was, and if we had not gotten an early start on the game, we wouldn't have been able to finish it. And I guess that's probably fair for the 4 of us playing together for the first time. One of the players being a first-time player for the game, though, man, he picked it up really fast. You would not have known. I mean, it's like he asked just a couple of questions just to make sure he was getting things right early in the game, but after that, man, he just went. But also, we were all learning Overload. Overload was new for all of us. So we kind of had to get used to, we had to figure out the best way to build our deck with the new cards, which I obviously didn't do. And we had to kind of get things to where we could build a good engine with the iospheres. And and figure out which kinds of the new contracts, the head-to-head or the flex, were going to work well for us. So, you know, there was some new stuff there that we had to do and some slight rule changes that we had to incorporate. But yeah, and I did miss one objective because at the end of the game I had a stack of objectives. I just lost track of what I was supposed to be doing, and I could have actually gotten another point from an objective card, but I totally forgot that I had, like, this was an objective in there because I stayed at base so much. I had a nice stack of objectives at the end. So I did not play optimally, but I had so much fun. And I think everybody else did. Robert had fun. He liked the game. He actually played the best game of his life, because when we played before, it's just the roughness of the game with lower player counts. With a two-player game, it's just not pleasant. And he struggled with it, and I struggled with it, and he struggled more than I did, I think, in two-player games. But in a four-player game, he had it. He was there. I mean, he was dead last. Like, he got stuck with 0 prestige points, and then he just staged this comeback and just started moving up the board. So, I mean, he didn't like overtake the leader or anything, but he was right up there in that tight pack, right there at the end, from being stuck at 0 for a few rounds, actually, which tells you that the game works pretty well. I mean, if you do badly at the beginning of this game, you can catch up. You can totally catch up. So that's a really good thing about this game. But we had a lot of fun playing. I think the two guys we met, Jay and Adrian, had fun playing too. They seem to be enjoying themselves. But yeah, we did not have time to like sit down and compare the thickness of our decks that we had made during the course of the game. But I would bet that the person with the fattest deck won. And we didn't have time to really do a total debrief of strategy and what was happening here and there. And back then when I played this, I really thought that you were going to, and then this would go here. And then I could have gotten that point there. You know, we didn't have time to go over the game afterwards, which was a shame because it turned out to be a really interesting and fun game. But yeah, it was a great experience with a couple of random local gamers. And I wouldn't mind doing it again with them. They were good playing partners, despite the fact that Jay got that objective. I think there's only one objective card that calls for you to tank a contract to make the objective. But I'm not absolutely sure there's only one objective card like that. There was only one in this game. That was funny, though. Oh man, and what a way to start the game too. It's like, wow, it's like, really, that's the way you want to start the game, is by tanking on a contract. But yeah, we kind of got each other's measure and we got a good rhythm going after a while. I do think the gameplay speeded up as the game went on. But it was so much fun, so very much fun. I'm really glad I got it. I want to try the Binding Ties expansion next, not separate but rolled in with Overload, because here's the thing, and this is also a concern I have about, I need to look at their little graphic for laying out the, oh, I can't reach it, I threw it across the table, the stickers, laying out the stickers on the inside of the box here. One concern I have about that and about this, and I don't know, I don't guess the stickers, yeah, the stickers would also go for this because they're double-sided, I think, is that, I don't know, this keeps everything separated out. It keeps the base game and Overload, the cards are separate. But honestly, I do not see any reason why anyone who owns the Overload expansion would ever want to play this game without it. So, you know, I'm going to have to kind of try to figure out how to organize the cards in the little action tray here so that I can group the Overload expansion cards with, I mean, these cards, yes, but, and then you have the same thing in this tray here. and I can't turn it up so that you can see, but you have the same sort of thing in that you have wider slots for like base game cards, and you have narrower slots for the smaller cards. But we're going to be playing with Overload. When I play Binding Ties, I'm going to play it with the Overload expansion. I'm going to roll it into the expansion that we just played on this thing. So yeah, that's going to be a thing. So I'm going to have to try to figure out how to organize these things to take into account the fact that I'm going to be playing with Overload personnel, Overload contracts, Overload cards, objectives, ship parts, that kind of thing, and organize it here with those cards shuffled into the base game cards and make it work for the organizer. Because that's one thing I don't think that they took into account here. I actually think that the organizer might have been better if they had had like removable dividers, you know, so that essentially you could organize the cards where you wanted to put them, you know, like little tab dividers or something, so that way if you always played with one of the expansions, then that expansion could always be shuffled in together. Otherwise you have to shuffle each expansion in every time you play the game because they're all separated. Anyhow, I have talked too much, but as you can see, we had a great time, and I love this game. And, yeah, that's about it. I have had fun enthusing at you about Moonrakers around the table here. I hope I didn't bore you too much. If you did, just like skip ahead, whatever, skip. Anyhow, like, subscribe, whatever. It's been fun. I'll see you next time around the table when it will be a little bit more of a normal video and a lot shorter.